Hey everybody, the Mobility Nerd Herd rides again. Well, not actually again, because this is our first of what will be a monthly event. And today and going forward, the Mobility Nerd Herd will ride into the safe, automated future where everything works and no one gets hurt. I'm joined by my good friend Jane Lappin. Well, top of the morning, Jane. Is Boston getting ready for a big St. Patrick's Day?
We are St. Patrick's headquarters here in Boston. Indeed.
Well, I'll assume you'll be celebrating with everybody else. Um,
Yeah.
let's get this automated vehicle show on the road. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I am Mike, the Mobility Nerd Nelson. It's a nickname I got a few years ago, and the marketing person that helps us with this said, you got to stick with it. So here we go. I'm an automotive expert going back to my childhood, where I worked at my dad's body shop, and then I worked in the insurance industry for 11 years with Met Property and Casualty, and began law school at night when I was 30. For the last 30 years, I've been a litigator and a regulatory attorney with Nelson Law, and I'm a member of the Society of Automotive Engineers, and I work on SAE's EDR committee, and I'm a board member of Rand's Institute for Civil Justice. I've worked on over 500 automated vehicle accidents, and as a result, have interacted with state and federal organizations such as the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, or as the cool kids say, the NHTSA, National Transportation Safety Board, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and the Federal Insurance Office. Before I introduce my co-host, Jane Lappin, let me remind everyone that we'll have a question and answer session in the last 10 minutes. And if anyone has a question, please drop them in the chat. Welcome, Jane. Well, tell us why you are so well known in the automotive industry.
Oh gosh. Mike, it's nice to be here. And to those who are on the phone with us, this was all Mike's idea. It's all Mike's idea. Um, I have 20 years of research at the USDOT Volpe Center looking at the interactions between drivers, pedestrians, and advanced vehicle and travel technologies, looking at the range of issues from the human-machine interface to traveler behavior, influence of technologies on demand for travel, highway operations, and most recently, over the last decade, the policy and regulatory implications for highly automated vehicles, which is how Mike and I met several years ago at the Automated Road Transportation Symposium, which I co-founded with Steve Schladover from UC Berkeley PATH. We've been through several incarnations, but we are now approaching our 14th year of convening with SAE as a sponsor. We'll be meeting in November, which is a huge change from the past when we met every summer in July. Um, we convene across sectors and issues and interests and globally to ensure that these discussions are transparent, that everyone understands the issues, has an opportunity to contribute and participate. And so perhaps that's why my name is well known, perhaps.
Well, I certainly know it.
Thank
Um, I was at a meeting that Jane and I frequent. It happens in January. It's called the SAE Government Industry Meeting. It takes place in DC. And I was in the audience listening to a panel of some really esteemed people. And some of the audience members got to ask some questions. And one of the question was, well, who's responsible in the event one of these cars has an accident? And we were talking about level 2 ADAS type vehicles. And the panel responded, well, the driver is solely responsible for the safe operation of a level 2 ADAS equipped vehicle. Then I heard a question asked about how is the legal system going to get built, the legal and regulatory system. And the response coming back from, again, one of these panel members was, well, that's going to be complicated and it's going to take a long time to work that out. And I, of course, had to challenge those assertions. I ran to the back of the room, grabbed a microphone, and I said, you can't simply put automated vehicles in the wild and then put in the fine print, don't blame us when stuff happens. And then I said, and we need the legal system now. And if it's going to be complicated and it's going to take a long time, we better get busy. So we decided that we'd begin to address some of these points and right before your very eyes, begin to unravel some myths and arguments of convenience while simultaneously help launch a deeper discussion on the future of the legal system related to mobility. We originally advertised this as having 10 questions that we would be addressing, or 10 myths. And as Jane and I worked through this, of course, we found out we just weren't going to have the time to do that. So we've narrowed that down to 5 myths or 5 questions. And Jane's going to be asking me and keeping me straight. But also, when we get to the end, again, we're going to leave 10 minutes for some questions that the audience might have. So, Jane, take it away.
Thanks. And in the spirit of questions, we're going to look at the chat. So I know you have other options for launching comment, but use the chat to make it easy for us to track along with you. Mike, you started by referencing the government industry meeting this past January, that the conversation inspired you to start writing down what are these myths that keep coming forward when we talk about automated, highly automated, and particularly though level 2 and 3 of automation. That you were in a room full of people who were well informed, deeply engaged, and yet certain myths keep being, regurgitated. And the first one you talked about were these disclaimers that, the assertion from the manufacturers that indeed humans can supervise the automation, that they can stay engaged in the driving task and intervene quickly enough to take control of the vehicle and safely steer it away from risk. What part of that gives you heartburn?
Well, there's the second myth we'll get into is human factors, which is can not really be done by human beings. But the first part of it is that the manufacturers are asserting that the takeover response can be adequately managed by human beings. And if they don't, the accident's their fault. There's just nothing in the law that says that. There is some sentiment expressed by NHTSA that the driver must remain ready to take over, but it doesn't say the driver is strictly liable if an accident happens. And that's far-fetched. And that's why I got up in the back of the room and said, that's poppycock. The idea that a manufacturer can put something into the wild and then say in the fine print, by the way, your problem or your insurance company's problem is just not how the law has ever worked. And it's not going to work that way in the future. You can put warnings in, but
Yeah.
you cannot disclaim or disavow any responsibility whatsoever.
So as a driver, when I buy a car that has lane keeping and adaptive cruise control, and they tell me, if you don't, you're going to void the warranty. It's like a product liability issue. If you don't use this according to our instructions, we disavow anything that happens next. It's all on you. So that doesn't apply, those normal product liability, misuse our product and we're not responsible for the outcome, doesn't apply?
Well, it's one thing to say that you have to be vigilant as these cars are operating. It's another thing to say that you are responsible in the event our technology fails. Now, put aside the practical implications, which we'll get to in a minute. It is not product liability law that you can simply say, not our fault. In fact, it's completely not correct in the product liability world to say it's not our fault. You have to put adequate warnings. But one of the things that the product liability law has adequately developed is that if a vehicle is going to be even arguably misused, so let's assume a car manufacturer says you misused the product because you didn't adequately take control of this, or you didn't adequately get ready for an accident you didn't know was going to happen. Um, it's it's foreseeable that the car and the driver could be in that situation. So therefore, the warnings don't apply in the way the manufacturers are expressing it. And then even if you look at NHTSA's recent works on this, they take the position that if a vehicle could be misused, or if a vehicle is subject to loss of control, that's a defect. And the manufacturers have to report on those defects, and they have to do everything in their power to correct those defects. So this idea that it's well settled that these, let's just make it about the car driver has all the responsibility and the car manufacturer none. That's not the way it works. That's not the way it's going to work in the future, nor could it. Because as we get further and further down the automated roadway, these cars are taking over more of the driving. I have two of these cars right now, and I drove from New York City to my home in the country in Pennsylvania, 2 hours, and the car drove virtually the entire way without me touching the steering wheel. And it was changing lanes. It was alerting me as to when there was a merge coming up, and it was handling all that on its own.
And so when we have talked in the past about laws and highly and automated vehicles and this murky place between what is the driver's responsibility and what is the vehicle's responsibility, you said to me, we need better laws. We need to lean into this. Case law isn't going to do it for us. What do you mean when you say case law isn't going to do it for us?
Well, case law is definitely going to color the environment that these issues develop in. But just to get a case to a judge, to have that judge make a decision, and then arguably the judge at a trial court level is not going to be considered binding precedent. So we're going to have to get to an appellate court, and in some states, the Supreme Court. That's going to take years. So let's assume at the quickest, that's a 5-year process. And that's going to be one case in one jurisdiction. That's not going to be a body of law. And we're only going to be talking about one issue. So can the driver be strictly liable? But we also have to get into what kind of evidence is going to come in. Who controls the data in the car? Who has access to that? The owner of the car? Third parties who've been injured by the car or the driver driving that car? How are we going to charge juries on these issues? How are we even going to get a jury to understand robotics? And I imagine there'll be a lot of people that will say, we've always dealt with these issues before, but not like this. And we have not had the challenges of pushing through car accidents that are really built on, in part, robotics.
Hmm. And so I don't know what the right legal term is, but in preparation for a trial, do you subpoena data from the car manufacturer as is that part of this murky area in your experience where it just needs to be standardized or settled in a different way?
Well,
Data.
the data, and I want to make sure people understand this. There is the on what some people call the black box, which really the proper term for that is the event data recorder. That's well settled that the data in that black box, that EDR recorder, belongs to the owner of the car. That's not the data we're really talking about, because that data won't reflect automation. It's going to be a narrow set of data signals. They're only 5 seconds long. They may become 20 seconds. That's in the works right now. But even at 20 seconds, that's not really adequate. And the data signals are coming out now at one increments of 0.2 of a second. The proposed rule is that it will come out at 1/1000th of a second. But the data that's going on inside these cars, or the data signals, is being captured at 1/1000th of a second. It's also capturing, these cars are capturing video and beaming it to clouds. So how do we access that when that's the best evidence of what took place in an accident, especially when a human being won't know why a car did whatever it did? So these are some of the legal issues, and there's some practical issues, but they're legal issues that are going to have to be worked out.
So one of your myths is that we all we need is the event data recorder black box to understand the crash. And you've just touched on why that's a myth. Could you talk more about the mismatch between what's in the EDR and what's needed from the vehicle systems to put together a full picture of what's happened?
Sure. So in the EDR data, there's about 30 signals, but they're somewhat redundant. So you get about 15 signals, and none of that touches on the automation directly. So we've had accidents, and I'll describe one. A gentleman's driving his level 2 vehicle in the left-hand lane of a 3-lane highway. He's in full self-drive. And all of a sudden, a tractor trailer moves from the right lane to the center lane. And his vehicle, without him knowing why, he's not on the accelerator, he's not touching the brake, he's not steering the steering wheel. And his vehicle leaves the left-hand lane, goes off into the median, and travels about 200 yards and hits a guardrail, and the car gets total lost. So in the EDR data, you'll see things like the speed, you'll see the turning angle of the steering wheel, you'll see the yaw of the vehicle, the sideways direction of the vehicle, if you will. You'll see whether or not the driver touched the brakes, but you're not going to see why the car, in this case, overreacted to that tractor trailer. So that level of automation is nowhere described in the black box. And that's just not a one-off situation. These things are happening every day, and we can see them in the data.
So let me circle back because one of the other myths that you've identified is the human factors myth, that as human drivers, we've got the capability to compensate quickly when the robotics says, back to you, Jane. Sorry, not at my pay grade. Back to you. Where's the mismatch in that design that you identify in your work?
Yeah, the mismatch is it's profound, really. So human beings, and there are plenty of studies on this, but the study that I'd like to refer to is actually a study by the Department of Transportation and NHTSA, along with car manufacturers and Virginia Tech. And they looked at driver reaction in level 2 vehicles. And uh, uh, the I'm looking at some of the comments coming in from some of the people watching, and so it's a little distracting. I'm going to, for the moment, ignore some of those. We'll get to those later on. But what is going on is the human being has to first recognize the problem. So how about that moment when you're driving and you say, oh, this is not going as planned? Because it's very situational. Of course, the person having that problem is also going to be different than the next person. But right now, it's safe to assume that a little over a second is how quickly you can get to the oh crap moment. My car is doing 75 and it's not staying on the road. Then you have to formulate a plan, which is, oh, well, how do I stop from going off the road? Do I take my steering wheel and turn it to the right and try to stay on the road? In this particular instance, by the way, that I'm describing, it's real. And the driver was fighting to keep the car on the road and it didn't work. But put that aside, you have to then formulate this plan and then you have to execute that plan. So it's
Right.
three steps. And some of the science right now is saying it can be anywhere from 5 to 7 seconds to put all that together.
Right.
And
Right.
that doesn't get you out of the harmful situation.
And so when you're in court and presenting this as a basis for why your client is not at fault, how does the court respond when you say the science from human factors does not support this product design assumption? People simply can't do it. What kind of a response do you get?
Well, I personally have never had to make that argument in court. Those arguments are going on right now, uh,
Yeah.
but in only a handful of cases. And that's why, as I said, it's going to take a while to get some of this jurisprudence worked out. Um, Complicating that is some of the car manufacturers contracts, their purchase contracts with consumers that they're required to go to AAA arbitration instead of
Hmm.
go to court. So those disputes won't see the light of day. They'll be settled in private litigation. There'll be no precedent built around this.
And that's binding. So the product advisory, if don't take your hands off the steering wheel or don't take your eyes off the road. The product advisory that does not stand in court necessarily, but the requirement to go to binding arbitration does.
Well, that's an ironic thing, isn't it? Yeah, it's very clear case law went all the way to the Supreme Court that not just in this context of cars, but manufacturers or people that put into or in commercial situations with the public can insert into their contracts that all disputes are to be resolved by AAA arbitration or by an arbitration process.
Yeah, yeah.
And yes, that is absolutely binding, and a lot of people have tried to attack that.
One of the problems that you've identified has to do with the way we, in the professional automated vehicles community, talk about levels of automation using SAE 1 through 5, as compared to the way, an average informed driver thinks about what have I got, what kind of a system do I have in my car, and what does that mean? Um, you talked about the myth of levels 1 through 5, but I think maybe we should reframe it and say SAE levels 1 through 5 work very well for those of us in the professional community, but there's something lacking when a consumer buys a vehicle and needs to begin developing a mental model about how exactly these systems work. You want to talk about how you see that with your work with clients and the public?
Yeah, my way of looking at this, and I'm not alone in this. I've heard, people from well, I'm not going to drop names because I don't have their permission, but really well-positioned people say we should be thinking of this as no automation, either it wasn't equipped or it wasn't on, automation, some level of control by the vehicle, and full automation. You're not even touching the steering wheel. This car doesn't even have one. So full automation is where this will all get to eventually, and maybe and probably. But the for the time being, what we're really talking about this partial automation, and it is we're going to be in that place for a very long time, for 20, 30 years. Put aside the fact that we really don't have a good legal system to deal with this yet. So when you compound that with the fact that these vehicles are being updated through over-the-air updates a couple times a month, and then we're using methods to inform the driver about what's going on. And one of my ADAS equipped vehicle, when it has a panic moment, now I'm not talking about a yellow moment, like heads up, you might be running out of electricity. I'm talking about you're in charge, take over. It's a red banner that pops up in a center screen that's only there for a couple seconds. And you're in this situation where now all of a sudden you've been told urgently, take over. And it's there and it disappears, and you're supposed to be looking at that screen to figure out what that is. Put aside the fact that we can't find where the windshield wiper speeds are or how to adjust the heat when all these other things that used to be knobs in the old days are now electronic little signals on dashes. These cars are hard to understand and they're getting more and more complicated. So, and they vary. Car manufacturers, we don't even have the same terms for lane keeping assist or full self-driving, whatever that means. So how do you inform the public? How do you get the public to be adequately informed as to what the car does? And God forbid, if they take over, what they're supposed to do.
Who does have responsibility for that? When I last bought a new car, I had a very funny conversation where the fellow said, women don't like using the automated features. Do you want to learn about it?
Right, we've got to put a sexist layer on
Yeah, but someone has responsibility. Do we download a simulation from the dealer, from the manufacturer? Do we sign up for a training program at the dealership? How do we develop the knowledge about how to work with the system off the road in a safe situation and not, as you said, 75 miles an hour down the highway?
Yeah, I mean, and that varies manufacturer to manufacturer. Some manufacturers are taking on more responsibility for the introduction of the vehicle. Again, I have two of these vehicles in my garage right now, both very similar. I'll just say one's a Tesla and one's a Rivian. The Rivian was driven to my driveway, and somebody walked me through that vehicle for an hour and a half. By comparison, I just received notice, ironically, this morning that my fourth Tesla is available for pickup, and I can select a 15-minute slot to get it. Not 20, 15. And that doesn't even
Yeah, it
go.
does kind of feel like buying a vehicle in a Sears catalog. I mean, that's the sort of model for Tesla.
Well, my very first Tesla was a Model S, and that was a much more simpler car from the standpoint of automation. It was called a 1.0 system, had one camera. Um, so it was all these cars are leased. I won't buy them because new technology is coming all the time. So I got very used to driving the Model S, and then the um, time came to pick up the new one. So I picked up a Model 3. I was very much in a rush to get out of there. So that's partially my fault. And the salesperson at Tesla said, well, you've had one of these cars before. You know how to do it. So I get in the car. Thank God my wife was with me in the co-pilot seat. And they had completely changed the automated driving platform. It used to be that you would pull on the left stalk to put in autopilot. That left stalk in the Model 3 was a turn signal. You had to, and this is counterintuitive, you had to take the gear selection lever and shift it down twice. Well, wait a minute, that can't be it. That's how I get it into neutral or park. No, that's how you put it into full self-driving. And I'm learning this as I'm driving on a highway in New York, a highway I wasn't even that familiar with. So, vehicle to vehicle, these things change even within manufacturers. So this
Yeah.
does get back to who's going to do the training. I mean, we've seen nuanced conversations about should we have a license for this? Are you
Yeah.
required to get training?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and
Right. And so, if I adopt the perspective of a naive driver and look at the diversity of driver interfaces and system performance, I think to myself, there must be an agency somewhere in charge of ensuring that nothing comes onto the road that hasn't been proven to be safe. There must be an agency somewhere that standardizes these things because and this is my research with consumers over years, asking them about safety and driving and how do you drive a car and what are the features that you look for. People in the general public assume that the government has their backs on this. And I wonder what your experience has been with your clients and the courts in the face of this sort of, it turns out that it's a clueless way of thinking, but it's certainly common.
It's very common. The the agencies involved in regulating the manufacturing these vehicles and releasing them to the public, they have no such requirements on training. They do oversee whether or not the vehicles meet the federal motor vehicle safety standards, but they really are not appropriate to these kinds of issues. So who's going to tell the manufacturers that they have to do this? This is again part of the legal system we have to develop. Is it in their best interest to avoid tort litigation by doing some of that training? It's not going to insulate them completely, but is it a good start? Probably. Is it the right thing to do? Definitely. And it should be something where you pick up a car and get 15 minutes of training. And I do think that there's some of the thinking there. I don't know this for sure, but if we train you how to drive it, then we're going to be exposed to when you have an accident, you're going to say you didn't train us properly.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a can of worms, doesn't it?
It does. And I just think in order to, it is in everybody's interest to get these cars safely on the road because I do think they're going to save lives. I think they're going to make driving much more efficient. I experienced full self-driving, a recent update. My software was just updated, and I was amazed at how much better this car drove than it did a month ago. It's not the same car. This is my old one I'm turning in, but it was amazing how well it worked.
One of your myths um, is that we don't need a new body of law for these new systems. And also the new interfaces, the Teslas that lack turn signal stems and instead use a very subtle embedded button on the steering wheel. Again, I think my word of the day is murky. Your myth that we don't need a new body of law. We need something in the face of these innovations to help drivers be consistently oriented uh, to use them properly, to use them safely. Where would you begin the list categories for what kinds of new law or regulation are required to improve the safety for users?
I knew I picked the right person to co-host this with me because you're asking a lot of great questions. And just so you don't back home, we haven't rehearsed this to this great extent. It's just a conversation between two colleagues that are really interested in this. The
It's the mobility nerd version of My Dinner with Andre, right?
what I think is misunderstood is this phrase "new body of law" is so broad. We're not going to change the law from negligence to something else. We're not going to change product liability to something else. We're not going to change implied warranty of merchantability to something else or the warranties themselves. What we're going to need to change is some of the things you're talking about. Like, how do we adequately train people? How do we regulate the manufacture and distribution of these things? How do we regulate the recall of these devices? And I think what's very telling is that even if we went on the regulatory front, which is supposed to make it the right way to approach these problems as opposed to having to litigate these things through countless court systems with a myriad of facts that's built on each accident. Even regulation takes a couple years. And then if you have changes of administration or you don't have a consistency of leadership in some of those organizations, they're going to struggle, as they have, to adequately deal with how are we going to regulate this. So the new body of law is going to have to adapt to how we handle product liability, how we handle recall, how we handle, breach of warranty, how we handle the fact that people that are not purchased of the vehicle but are struck by one, what's their recourse and how do they go through this process? And again, some of these things like the evidence and the data and how do you get at it? Because there's a really good argument that car makers make about the data in the car. They want to say, wait a minute, some of this is proprietary on our part. And if we show you how we process the data, we're giving away the trade secrets. Sure. But there's another adequate way of looking at this, which is a certain amount of that data is necessary to inform investigators and the public about what took place in an accident. And we don't have that mechanism right now. Some of the car manufacturers are starting to release some data, and I commend those manufacturers. I'll commend Tesla for doing a great job of getting some of this data out there. And for those of you who don't know it, when a Tesla has an accident and it's in the right situation, a vehicle will beam the data from the car to a cloud in less than a minute or two, and then it's available to the consumer within 30 minutes, simply by hitting their app and downloading the data. That's fantastic. Not all car manufacturers are doing that.
We
Now,
have a great, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so I do need to get to this one point, which is that's just the owner of the car getting what is arguably their data. What are we going to do to understand accidents better and process civil litigation? And how are we going to allow third parties the same access? And so I think there is a social contract with people that are operating these vehicles or people that sell these vehicles that say, listen, this clearly has the ability to impact innocent pedestrians, other drivers. And so I think the view should be that a certain amount of this information, more than just the EDR, for the reasons I've already spoken about, needs to be available because the roads are public and you expose a lot of people to this technology, and we have to have a good framework that everybody can understand in a transparent way how that accident happened.
So we have a great clarification question on that point in the chat, asking whether the Tesla upload of crash data is the same as what's sent to NHTSA for the SGO, the general. Is it?
You ask a real good question. To the extent I know what data has been sent to NHTSA in any given accident, I'm under confidentiality agreements and I can't discuss it.
Oh, I got another question for you.
But it's also even more complicated than that. So under the standing general order, car manufacturers could say, I'm disclosing this, but this portion of it is trade secret. So therefore, we're going to send it to the general counsel of NHTSA, and they'll decide whether or not it's proprietary or not subject to disclosure. Well, you can imagine what the car manufacturers are doing. They're saying this data is proprietary and it's not being disclosed. Some of it is, but not all of it, because the argument is being made that's ours. So there's no way I can comment because the data I do know about that I have seen produced SGOs or produced in litigation is more fulsome than the data that's provided to consumers that have been involved in an accident.
So there's a group of automakers working with a company called MITRE on a project that is modeled after the airline safety system, where for each of these crashes, they anonymously submit the data to a central database managed securely by MITRE. MITRE then strips out the proprietary identification and sends a description of this accident and the way it happened to all the members of the consortium so that they can all have the benefit of learning from the one accident about issues that they can address for themselves in their own systems to improve the safety of their vehicle systems. Does that seem like a good adjunct in your experience with how do you improve safety? How do you improve the accountability and the impact for these manufacturers?
Yeah, that body work is fantastic and it should keep going on. Okay. And to the extent that some of that information is, more or less anonymous, I think that's a really important development, especially as it informs regulators about how to look at the safety problems. Um,
Right,
it doesn't do justice to an individual accident and understanding what took place.
right,
And it doesn't inform the public. It doesn't allow access to bring that information into the legal system. So that's great as it looks at holistically how this technology is developing. There is a good time lag on this, by the way. Okay, so this is not instantaneous, um, and it is anonymized.
right.
So that's a drawback, but I think it's an important point to move the ball forward. But we need to get past that's the answer because that's not. That's an answer to one problem, which is
Right.
how to inform regulation in other car manufacturers.
I'm gonna switch over to the chat for a question that goes to one of your myths. The question asks what you think about the UK legislation on misleading marketing that will make it illegal for manufacturers to use terminology that would lead customers to misinterpret the level of capability of the vehicle. And obviously, this goes right to the full self-driving labeling associated with Tesla's system. The UK is made this illegal. What do you think about that?
Well, without getting into the specifics of any particular car manufacturer, I think any manufacturer of any product that mislabels safety or potential dangers or takes the position that these vehicles are better than a human driver or that the vehicle is equipped with autonomous driving. Um, yeah, I think the law should address that stuff. Um, and I do think Europe is ahead of the US in starting to tackle these problems. And that's
Well,
also one of the
the
problems.
UK, credit to UK, they're not the same as Europe.
Well, yeah, but in Germany just had a finding that phantom braking was a problem that Tesla knew about, and it was defective, um,
Right.
and it needed to be dealt with. For anybody who's been involved in one of these cars where it has a phantom braking episode, I completely agree with that point of view. So it's not just the UK and Europe, although I agree with that. But there's a lot of different bodies that are working on this. The United Nations, for instance, is working on some of this, and then China DSSAD. So there, we're going to get in a situation because this is a global problem where we could have some regulatory arbitrage going on. And so if you think about if the if the governments of those countries create rules, are they in some ways promoting the car manufacturers that emanate from those jurisdictions with the idea that those cars will be easier to regulate? And so that kind of dynamic has taken place not just in the context of automobiles, but there's always this tension in how governments issue some rules, and does that promote the products coming from those countries, or do we give tip our hats that Europe and the UK and other states or regiments are doing a much better job in front of these issues? I would say yes, they are much more advanced than the US.
And I would say, in fairness to us in the US, that we have a very different approach to regulation, where in Europe, and I'm going to stay with Europe and not the UK, anything that is not defined strictly as legal is illegal. And here, anything that isn't strictly defined as illegal is legal. And while it opens the US up to a great deal more public risk, it also creates a very dynamic market for innovation and for investment and for economic development. So I'm going to ask a question from the chat. And the question asks, what about personal accountability? With deteriorating driving standards that are only getting worse, why haven't we mandated dash cam and driver monitoring for all drivers and vehicles? In particular, why haven't insurance companies demanded it? The writer goes on to say privacy is a terrible excuse. Um, so what do you think about a mandate from insurance companies to monitor driving and drivers?
Yeah, so we start to get into data privacy issues, and we also have to look at only some car manufacturers were using the camera focused on the driver and paying attention as a connection point between are you paying attention. Some car manufacturers, notably Tesla and Rivian, were not using the camera; they were using hands on the wheel, which we've seen multitude of examples of people doing really stupid things. But I can also tell you firsthand that when Tesla was requiring me to keep my hands on the wheel, it doesn't require that as when I'm in full self drive now. But you could simply just put your finger on the steering wheel and keep it quiet, keep it satisfied. I do think the camera mode where it's looking at your face, and boy, what a difference that's been in the last year. It's amazing. The minute you even touch your phone, not that I would ever do that, but the minute you touch your phone, you get a warning saying, pay attention. That's profound. And should that be in every car? Absolutely. Can insurance companies require that? No, they're in no position to require anything like that. They can certainly say this car has a better experience, loss experience than this car, but that takes years to say this car is safer than that car. But I do think the insurance industry has to work closer with car manufacturers. And that's a point, it's probably the legal system that I'm talking about too. But insurance is regulated by state insurance commissioners. Car manufacturers are regulated by federal regulators. They hardly know each other.
Yeah. Well, we have a question in the chat that looks like another lawyer asking you something important. I can't judge. What is the experience with claims against product liability insurance policies? Case law, new boundaries on interpretation of insurance contracts. Um,
I just saw that question pop up, and that's from a guy named John, who is a really well respected actuary. He's not a lawyer.
yeah.
He's an actuary. We haven't gotten to product liability cases on this yet. We're just getting there. And there's a case that's really this is going to change the landscape a lot. It's going on in Florida right now. It's against Tesla. It involved one of those fatalities where the vehicle went under the tractor trailer. But that's a really good point about how long that's taking. I think that accident happened in 2019, and we haven't even gotten to a trial yet.
Wow.
And just think about how slow this is going to take. But to answer the question on product liability fronts, um, no, there's no law yet. There's no cases that I know of that have addressed these problems from a product liability standpoint. So if an insurer is thinking about, do I need to address my the way product liability is going to shape the risk for me, you're going to wait a long time for that.
We have another question related to who should be training drivers on the systems. And the writer asks, if not OEMs, then who? OEMs have said they can't even meet suggestions on paring down the vehicle manual to be specific to that model and automation included and keep it simple and direct because of legal liability if they summarize and leave out something that folks can sue them for later. Well, how do we thread that needle of no one knows the system better than the manufacturer, and the perfect opportunity for training is at that point of purchase? How do we make that connection?
Yeah, I don't. In fairness to the car manufacturers, I'm not sure that is a great answer. It's an answer, but think about people that weren't there at the point of sale, people that subsequently buy that car as a used car. Um,
Right?
again, these vehicles are being updated virtually weekly with new technology, with over-the-air updates, and that's only going to progress. So, and if you read the notes that associate with over-the-air updates, a mutual friend of ours and probably well known by a lot of people listening in, Brian Reamer, I read to him in a meeting once an over-the-air update that came down from Tesla, and it was a good 5, 6, 7 seconds describing this update. And it was all in engineering speak. And I read it out loud and I said, Brian, what's that mean? And he said, I don't know. Uh, so, I'm challenged every time I read these things. So how do you do the training? And I think the OEM should start. They have the most connection, but I do think we have to start to weave this into driver education programs. I do think we need to start thinking about insurance companies giving certification or discounts for drivers that pass safety tests associated with driving these kind of cars. Because insurance companies would benefit from having a much safer driving environment. So I do think insurers can step up into that role. I think insurance regulators should encourage insurers to do that. So I do think there's 3 or 4 ways to approach this, but we better get busy going back to my earlier point because none of that's being done now.
We have about 5 minutes left. I'm wondering if there are any questions I haven't asked you, Mike, that you wish had come up in the course of conversation so you could talk about it. Um,
I
I,
think I think one of the things that would be helpful, and we do plan on doing more of these. The question's always asked: how many cars transmit data? How much of the fleet has ADAS at a high level? Um, what are the implications for electrification of this fleet? So let me start off quickly with some one hitters on this as we go through this. Um, the the fleet now coming out in 2025 almost uniformly has modems that take data from the cars to a cloud, and that's going to increase. So there's not just in terms of how many cars. Again, I said it's 100%, but the amount of data that's going to be beamed to the cloud is going to be increasing dramatically as we bring 5G online in these modems. So you're going to have much more likely events where cars are talking to each other. The other thing is how much ADAS is out there. And more than half of the cars being sold right now have higher forms of ADAS. I'm not talking about backup cameras or lane keeping assist flashing lights. I'm talking about real automation. More than half of the cars coming into the fleet right now have higher forms of automation. And then with electrification, what's the impact on that? And we can get into electrification as to whether or not that's a good idea or a bad idea. But these cars perform much better when they use an electric base because the energy to drive these cars is better, the energy's cleaner, and it's more consistent. So as we travel down the road, these are other aspects of this that they're gonna color the conversation.
There's a really interesting question that I'm going from in the chat as a final question to you about blockchain as a technology to provide proof of events. And one of the writers says that it's a legal requirement in the EU now that blockchain-based proof of events are required. Have you come across this in your work to date?
Not in the US and not in the way that the question's being asked. Is there any question that car manufacturers are using blockchain to detail some of this? Yes. Should we open that up? Absolutely. Again, we need a good, transparent, objective measure about what was going on leading up to and through the time of the accident. And then we need to lock it down because while there's I don't think any car manufacturer is playing with the data, but I am concerned that some cars' data is being erased from cars after transmission. I have some concerns that data is being erased after the vehicle sold because think about the total loss of an automobile. Uh, that data now is in somebody else's car. And when that happens, then we're going to run into a situation where evidence is lost.
Right, right. Destroyed, lost, misused, misappropriated. It is 1:28 on my timekeeper, and I want to take a moment to thank all of our participants for staying with us for an hour. And to thank you, Mike, for inviting me to talk with you this way. This kind of a conversation builds on lots of other conversations, and more importantly, on a foundation of great personal respect. I really enjoy our conversations, and I'm awfully glad we met.
Well, me too, Jane. And we can geek out on the mobility stuff, but
Yeah.
I part of this that we have to move past just the conversation. Unfortunately, this has been a conversation. We have to figure out how we're going to take this conversation and start to make it real from the standpoint of creating a new framework for how to think about safety and for think about how to deal with the problems when they do happen so that the right people get the right remedies. I'm not saying this as a plaintiff lawyer because generally I'm not, but we do have to get a much more efficient legal system behind the problems as well as creating a good regulatory scheme that promotes safety and the advancement of this technology. I too want to thank the people that have attended. Again, we're going to be doing this on a monthly basis. We have four or five more minutes to go through in the next session. We hope you join us. We hope you tell some friends, and we look forward to the feedback. Thank you, Ellen. Ellen just said oxymoron, efficient legal system. But anyway, we'll end on that note. Would appreciate your comments afterwards, and thank you all, and see you next month.
Bye. Thanks.